Illinois State's 19th president. Prior to coming to ISU, he served as Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, and he held various other leadership positions at the University of Missouri and Iowa State University. President Dietz's passion for higher education has taken an already highly esteemed ISU to new heights. With his leadership, the university is continually ranked among the top in the nation for high graduation and retention rates and low student loan default rates. He leaves ISU on a footing that is full of potential. And I've had the pleasure of working with Larry since he became president. A personal testament I have to his success is the fact that all three of my children attend Illinois State University, the institution he leads. Congratulations on your retirement, Mr. President. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Smucker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor and to pay tribute to a community leader, a veteran, and a vocal advocate, Mr. Frank Freiberg, who passed away last week at the age of 94. Those of us who had the pleasure to know Frank know that he lived a life of service to others. Frank joined the Navy in 1944 as an electronic technician and went on to serve 20 years in the Navy Reserves. Frank was a graduate of Penn State University, earning his bachelor's degree in physics on the GI Bill. He later earned his MBA from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. Frank served his community for a decade as a commissioner in Manheim Township in Lancaster County. He was an active member of his church, a national leader of his fraternity, and worked to support countless community organizations over the years. With Frank, you always knew where you stood. He always shared his opinions with you, and they were very well thought out. He was recently recognized as one of the most prolific letter writers to the editor in the local newspaper. Frank Freiberg was a man of exceptional character, of boundless energy and determination, a true servant leader, and a community advocate. Frank is survived by 6 children, 13 grandchildren, and 20 great-grandchildren. We will miss him, and we wish those who are grieving comfort, and we give thanks for the opportunity to know Frank, who positively impacted so many people during his 94 years. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give thanks to someone who has positively impacted the lives of a generation of students and untold generations to come in Pennsylvania's 11th Congressional District. Alex Monroe has retired after 30 years as Executive Director of the Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology Foundation and Alumni Association. Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology is known across the state and across the nation as a preeminent 2-year degree-granting institution which prepares students for today's in-demand technical jobs. Alex, prior to serving the college, graduated from the school, then known as the Thaddeus Stevens Trade School, and he talked many times about how it changed his life. He studied masonry at the school. After 25 years in the private sector, successfully applying those skills and the lessons that he learned at Thaddeus Stevens, Alex joined the Alumni Foundation Board before becoming the foundation's executive director in 1990. Alex has been integral to the advancement of the school, building relationships with elected officials and industry leaders to support expansion of the school's mission and programs. He's known as saying, and I quote, "Changing lives is not by chance, it is a tradition at Stevens." And that is a tradition that he has dedicated himself to for the past 30 years. I personally have worked with Alex for a number of years, and I've always appreciated his efforts and his candor. I want to thank Alex for all he has done to improve the lives of so many students and congratulate him on his retirement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nels, for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 5.
Without objection. Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, for months now, our country has witnessed the never-ending, horrific images and stories coming from our southern border. We've seen young children thrown over a 14-foot fence like a rag doll. We've seen children wandering alone, abandoned in South Texas. We've seen thousands of children packed like sardines into holding facilities meant for 250. And we've seen countless horrific tales of young women sexually assaulted by coyotes on their trek up here. When I traveled to the southern border in March and again in May, I saw the Biden border crisis firsthand. I spoke to Border Patrol agents who said that they're beyond spread thin trying to juggle securing the border with an inadequate number of agents, while simultaneously babysitting the unprecedented number of migrant children who continue to flood across our southern border daily. While they're busy babysitting, violent criminal aliens are slipping through undetected. These stories are undisputable. They are entirely based in fact and truth, but rather than recognize and address the reality of the situation, Democrats and the Biden administration are downplaying, distracting, and denying. They're downplaying the severity of this crisis by refusing to call it a crisis, saying instead it's a challenge. They're denying the crisis by refusing to visit the southern border in person. It has been 55 days since President Biden tapped Kamala Harris to be the lead on the border, and she still has not visited. And they're distracting from this crisis by talking about anything but the border. Love or hate him, under President Trump, we finally had a leader willing to step up and fix the mess at our southern border. A mess our country has failed to deal with for decades under both Republican and Democrat leadership. President Trump was the only president who truly took the necessary steps to not only stop the flow of illegal aliens across our borders, but to deter caravans from ever forming. He instituted common sense policies like the Remain in Mexico policy, ending catch and release, and building a big, beautiful wall with beautiful gates, because as we all know, this isn't about legal immigration, it's about illegal immigration. We are a nation of laws and law and order, or at least we used to be. Ever since President Biden assumed control of the White House, there has been an outright refusal from his administration to put the American people first and address the growing crisis at our southern border. Their inaction will cost American lives, will cost billions of American taxpayer dollars, and we will once again put the responsibility of the federal government on individual states. And I know, I saw it firsthand as a county sheriff for 8 years in Texas. I had to look victims of crime in the eyes after their loved one was killed or their homes burglarized, and to tell these individuals, I'm sorry for what happened to you, but we caught the guy, and I am sad to tell you that he's been deported 4, 5, 6 times. I had to tell this specifically to dozens of residents in my home county whose homes were burglarized by a burglary ring of illegal aliens from, yes, Honduras and Colombia, many of whom been deported multiple times. In January of 2020, I had to tell the son of an elderly Texas woman who was killed in a hit and run that the illegal alien who ran his mother over had been deported 6 times. On earth, does anyone ever get deported more than 1 time from our country? It happens because the federal government is failing to secure the southern border. It's mind-boggling to me that the Democrat Party has accepted that American lives will be lost and billions of taxpayer dollars wasted so illegal aliens can flood into our country simply because their home country is corrupt or crippled. Economic hardship or struggle in your home country is not justification for breaking the law and skipping the lines of millions of people patiently waiting to legally immigrate here. We are not the world's charity. We are not a nation of open borders. We are a nation of laws, and it is past time the current administration wakes the hell up and remembers that fact. But I won't hold my breath, and neither should the American people. Democrats have demonstrated right to our faces that they don't care about putting the American people first. Members of Congress and the American people need to speak up and speak out about the Barton border crisis.
Gentleman's time has expired.
And hold this administration's feet to the fire until they reverse course.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cloud, for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to address the House and to
Without
revise these
objection,
to my
the
remarks.
gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to advocate for fiscal responsibility as Congress seeks to craft a budget. This past year, our nation has spent more than $7.6 trillion. That is more than the federal government spent in the first 200 years since our founding. With the federal government's debt already clocking in at $28 trillion and rising as I speak, we must face the reality that our grandchildren are going to foot this bill. On May 12th, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics announced that inflation had grown by 4.2% over the last year. That's the largest 12-month increase since September of 2008. Should we continue to spend at this rate that we're spending, our national debt, debt servicing, and costs for household items will continue to skyrocket, making life unaffordable for millions more. This is not right. It is immoral for us to continue to fulfill the wants and needs of our generation by stealing opportunity from the next. We must do the hard work of meeting our country's needs and responsibly. The Republican Study Committee has proposed such a budget, a conservative budget, one that provides a roadmap toward a better future for our country. This budget gets us back on track in just 5 years while eliminating the deficit and cutting taxes. This is a conservative budget, one that aims to strengthen our nation and provide better governance. I am pleased to report that the RSC budget includes 4 of my legislative proposals, including my bill to require the Congressional Budget Office to include the cost of debt servicing when preparing cost estimates for proposed legislation. Before legislation passes either the House or Senate, lawmakers should know how much it's going to cost. Yet Congress routinely ignores the true costs and overstates the benefits of new spending. The American people have to account for the cost of debt servicing in their family budgets, and providing Congress with accurate cost estimates that include the cost of debt servicing is common sense reform that would hold Congress to the same standard, forcing lawmakers to reckon with the actual cost of raising our national debt. Additionally, this budget is pro-life. It includes my bill, the Women's Public Health and Safety Act, which would help prevent taxpayer dollars from funding abortion providers. This legislation will empower states to end the bankrolling of abortion providers and free up funding for health care initiatives for those providers that actually put the well-being of women and babies first. This budget is pro-Second Amendment and includes my legislation to prohibit a national disaster declaration from being used to impose gun or ammo controls. And finally, this bill is fiscally responsible. It includes my legislation for a federal sunset commission to monitor the effectiveness of government agencies and prevent wasteful inefficiencies and duplicative programming. I want to thank the RSC Budget Task Force Chairman, Congressman Hern, and the Chairman of the RSC, Congressman Banks, for putting forth a bold budget. We can get our nation back on track. We just need to put in the time to do what we have to do here in Washington. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Taylor Greene, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for up to 5 minutes and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the commission to study the events of January 6th, as well as spending $2 billion in security supplemental. The question that comes to mind is this: what about all the riots that happened during the summer of 2020 after the death of George Floyd? What about all the damage caused to federal buildings, churches, people's businesses, and innocent people that were killed, like David Dorn? This past summer, Minneapolis, city officials estimate 700 buildings were damaged, burned, or destroyed, including 360 local businesses. Riots caused an estimated $55 million in damages in Minneapolis alone. BLM and Antifa established an autonomous zone in Seattle and attempted to burn government buildings in Portland. Is that not an insurrection? On one Friday night alone in New York City, BLM protesters caused over $100,000 in damages and 150 people were arrested. Just one Monday night in Philadelphia resulted in a crowd of 1,000 people looting stores, setting fires in the middle of the street, and 30 police officers injured. Protests in Kansas City resulted in $2.1 million in damages, mostly over the course of one weekend. Several officers were injured as well. Protests in Wichita, Kansas cost the police department about $1.5 million in overtime. Protests in Salt Lake City cost at least $100,000 in damages. Protests in Denver cost the city at least $5.5 million in damages and overtime. BLM protests in Nashville set a federal courthouse on fire. The destruction is estimated to have cost $1.2 million in damages. Again, is that an insurrection? Protesters in Portland destroyed barriers and attempted to burn down government buildings, resulting in $2.3 million in damages, including $1.6 million in damages to the courthouse downtown. In St. Louis, following the night of violence, buildings were looted, vandalized, and burned. Protesters in Louisville set the courthouse on fire and shot 2 cops, resulting in a state of emergency ordered being declared. Protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin, injured. Police officers set off fireworks near the building and courthouse and set at least 2 city trucks on fire. In Guilford County, North Carolina, a courthouse was broken into, set on fire, resulting in roughly $200,000 in damages. Protests in Oakland, California, resulted in a courthouse being set on fire and vandalized. The LAPD was defunded by $150 million, and some smaller crime units were eliminated entirely. Studies show 570 protests in 220 U.S. locations turned violent over the summer. Are those not insurrections? The $1+ billion in riot damage is estimated to be the most expensive in insurance history. It resulted in up to $2 billion of damages in 20 cities across the U.S., mostly concentrated in LA, Detroit, Miami, D.C., and New York. Indeed, we should have a commission to study the violent BLM and Antifa mobs that have plagued American cities this past summer, and that's for the American people who, by the way, pay the taxes that fund everything we do here. Also, we should have a security supplemental to fund all the police departments that have been defunded due to the pressure from radical, violent, and socialist groups. We should back the blue because they certainly back us. Also, while it's catch and release for domestic terrorists, Antifa, BLM, the people who breached the Capitol on January 6th are being abused, some even being held for 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. So, Mr. Speaker, my questions are this. Who placed the pipe bombs at the RNC and the DNC, which is an attack on both Republicans and Democrats? Why was President Trump's request on January 5th for 10,000 National Guard denied? And who denied it? And what chain of command did they follow? Also, who killed Ashley Babbitt? And why is that not being revealed? Does her family not deserve justice? And lastly, when will the witch hunt of Donald J. Trump come to an end and all of those who support him? I rest my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address the House for 5 minutes and to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are doing to Israel is nothing short of evil and barbaric. Even worse, some of my colleagues across the aisle and in the national media are excusing this violence against our closest ally in the Middle East. It is a fact that Hamas and the PIJ if they were to lay down their weapons, there would be peace. But if the Israelis laid down theirs, they would be exterminated. There's no secret because these two terrorist groups explicitly say their goal is to wipe Israel off the face of the map, and their actions back up their words, Mr. Speaker. I think a history lesson in global current affairs update is in order for the members of Congress and media organizations taking the side of terrorists intent on exterminating Israel and the entire Jewish population. For starters, nobody should forget that in 1997, it was President Bill Clinton's State Department that placed Hamas and the PIJ on the United States list of foreign terrorist organizations. Both groups are still on the list today, and for good reason. Israel removed their forces from the Gaza Strip in 2005, but in 2007, Hamas violently forced out Fatah in its rival Palestinian faction and consolidated its control of the entire Gaza Strip. A terrorist organization controlling territory within mere miles of the Jewish communities leaves Israeli civilians vulnerable to violent attacks, Mr. Speaker. Israel's military blockade protects its rightful homeland from infiltration by radical jihadi terrorists. The blockade is important for preventing the transfer of weapons from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which gives support to Hamas and PIJ. God only knows the devastation recent missile attacks would have inflicted on the Iranians if they were able to smuggle guided missiles into the Gaza Strip. Despite the blockade, Hamas and PIJ still construct their terror tunnels and manufacture their rockets with dual-use materials like concrete, steel, chemicals, fuel, and explosives, and many other things. These materials, which the Israelis allow to pass through their blockade, are meant for infrastructure in Gaza, only to wind up confiscated by the terrorists for their horrific attacks, Mr. Speaker. And if anybody questions the existence of the tunnels for their use, I recommend they go on the next Kodel to Israel to see for themselves. I've been there and stood in them, and they are, in fact, 100% real. This is a dilemma for Israel. They want to improve civilian life in Gaza by letting these important materials pass through its blockade, but they also know their enemies will steal these materials and try to harm Israelis. The violence that began last week came as a result of protests regarding an ongoing Israeli court order to evict Palestinian families from the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of Jerusalem. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who is serving his 16th year of what is supposed to be a 4-year term, Mr. Speaker, called for unrest in the streets. Not to be outdone, Hamas and the PIJ recognized a political opportunity to assume the mantle as prosecutors of all Palestinian people, as protectors, excuse me. These terrorist groups responded by gutlessly and indiscriminately firing over 3,000 missiles since last Monday at hospitals, schools, and other civilian population centers across central and southern Israel. Thankfully, the United States provides Israel with generous military assistance for the Iron Dome and other missile defenses. The system has intercepted 90% of the missiles, 90%, Mr. Speaker. However, there have been 10 Israelis killed, including 2 children. Israel has the right to defend itself from unprovoked terrorist attacks from Hamas, PIJ, and anybody else. The Israelis responded forcefully, actively trying to limit civilian casualties by calling residents in targeted buildings and employing the knock-on-the-roof warnings. This is a courtesy terror groups like Hamas and PIJ do not and will never return. Without these important measures, Mr. Speaker, hundreds more Palestinian civilians would be dead because Hamas and PIJ use commercial and residential buildings to house their military operations and ammunition depots. This disgusting tactic is the reason why the Palestinian death toll is higher and why the lives of dozens of innocent Palestinian children have been lost. These terror groups are more than willing to use their own power and their own people as human shields for the sake of vilifying Israel. And unfortunately, the most radical members of Congress and the American mainstream media have bought this narrative hook, line, and sinker, Mr. Speaker. Hamas and the PIJ are no friends of ours and want the same fate for Israel that so many terrorists want for the United States, the complete and total destruction of democracy. If you are going to blame Israel alone for the recent violence, you are being nothing more than a useful idiot and a publicity tool for the two terrorist organizations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Mooney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
Today, I have the privilege of recognizing one of the millions of hardworking, tax-paying Americans who form the foundation of our nation's economy through their employment in small business, in this particular case, the healthcare industry. Mrs. Terry Toppings of Elkins, West Virginia, has served her patients exceptionally well throughout her distinguished career as an orthopedic nurse manager. As a result, Mrs. Topping is beloved by her community for the conscientious care that she has provided to those in need. Her outstanding performance has helped her local hospital, the Davis Memorial Hospital in Elkins, West Virginia, become one of the best hospitals for joint care in the entire Mountain State. So it's hardly surprising that Mrs. Topping's patients illustrated their deep appreciation for her incredible efforts when the Intermountains 2021 People's Choice Awards opened balloting to the public. In a heartwarming display, those graced by Mrs. Topping's skill and dedication voted in droves to grant her this year's award for Best Nurse. This tremendous honor is well-deserved. I would like to also extend my thanks and congratulations to Nurse Topping for her phenomenal service to the people of West Virginia. I encourage everyone, especially young nurses, to follow her extraordinary example. Terry Topping and her husband, Rhett Topping, are the mother and father of 3 beautiful daughters. They also are grandparents. They have their first grandchild, fortunately, living nearby, locally near them in West Virginia. I consider them personal friends, and they are pillars of the community. So congratulations to Nurse Terry Topping for your Nurse of the Year award. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, for 8 generations, my family has lived in the mountains of western North Carolina. Many of my family members have served in our armed forces. I grew up surrounded by men of courage and patriotism who dedicated their lives and their honor in defense of this American republic. I understand as much as one can without serving the struggle a veteran faces attempting to reacclimate to civilian life. It is incumbent on the American people to work hand in hand with our veterans and streamline their transition back into the workforce. To that end, I urge support for H.R. 2167, GI Bill, the National Emergency Extended Deadline Act. Included in this larger piece of legislation is a program that I am proud to advocate for. My language in this bill authorizes a pilot program to allow states to use grants or contracts to carry out short-term fellowship programs for unemployed veterans. This program is not some revolutionary concept, but what it does is build off the successes of other pilot programs. In the veteran community, this program would authorize DOL vets to carry out a pilot program similar to fellowship programs created by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to allow states to use grants or contracts to carry out short-term fellowship program. After the participating states have been selected by the DOL, each state would enter into an agreement with a nonprofit organization to carry out the short-term fellowship program. Participants would be provided a small stipend while they are participating in the program. This program prioritizes veterans and opens up new and unique pathways towards employment. This new fellowship program will build upon the successes of other fellowship programs across the country, and I am confident that it will empower American unemployed veterans to find meaningful work in the post-COVID economy. The benefits of this program are numerous. It will give eligible veterans the ability to gain on-the-job experience in a field of their interests while earning a monthly stipend. I will always fight for the veteran community in C11, and this program is a bipartisan measure that puts veterans first. One of the foundational attributes of Americanism is our sense of brotherhood. Those who sacrifice for the good of this nation are not simply a resource to be utilized and then cast aside. These are our heroes, and they deserve much more than what our nation currently provides them. When I left my mountain home to come to Washington, I promised the veterans in our district that I would be their weapon in Washington. I will never abandon those who sacrifice their life and livelihood in defense of our freedoms. For too long, we've cast our veterans, these guardians of our republic, by the wayside and derided their sacrifice. Never forget, America is the land of the free because of the brave. Together, we can show these men and women who dedicated their lives to us that we will not turn our backs on them. Join me in supporting the new Veterans Fellowship Program, and let's take a firm step towards supporting our veterans. I urge all my colleagues to vote in favor of H.R. 2167, the National Emergency Extended Deadline Act. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? God of the universe and all who dwell therein, every nation, every tribe, every people and language stands before your throne. In gratitude, we stand alongside our brothers and sisters to celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Month, acknowledging the first known Japanese immigrants in 1843, the Chinese laborers who sacrificed their lives and dignity to build the Transcontinental Railroad, the Vietnamese for whose freedom many spilled blood. We pause to stop and consider how you have brought them and countless others, Koreans, Filipinos, Indians, and Pacific Islanders, to these shores as immigrants, refugees, or even war brides, blessing their journeys with hope for the freedom and opportunity our country's vast resources provide. Lord, we acknowledge and honor so many who have made significant contributions to law and medicine, science and technology, arts and entertainment. How humbled we are by the wideness of your embrace, and how indebted we are to the evidence of your hand in all of creation. Free us then from our hatred or indifference toward those whom we perceive as the other. Instead, reconcile us to yourself and to our compatriots, that we may consider how, by your divine providence and grace, O Lord, we are a richer nation because of the blessing of our diversity. It is in the unity of your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Pursuant to Section 11A of House Resolution 188, the Journal of the last day's proceedings is approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. What purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize and celebrate Ms.
Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent?
Madam Speaker, thank you. I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to recognize and celebrate Ms. Juliana Urtubey, a Nevada teacher who is committed to joyful and just education, who has led to her work and well-deserved selection as the 2021 National Teacher of the Year. Ms. Urtubey is a first-generation immigrant and bilingual educator who works in special education at Booker Elementary in Nevada's 4th Congressional District. At Booker Elementary, she is known as Miss Earth for beautifying the community with gardens and murals. She teaches her students to take pride in themselves, their identities, and their strengths. She is the best of Nevada, the best of our educators, and we are so proud of her. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
What is the name from Nevada? Where is he? For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, Mr. Thompson is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor Eli Blaisdell of South Fork, Pennsylvania. Eli has accepted a fully qualified appointment to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in New York. Eli is a senior at Bishop Carroll Catholic High School. He has 2 siblings, Eben and Margaret. He is the son of Michael and Karen Blaisdell. He is the grandson of the late Herbert and Carolyn Kessler and Eva Starr Kessler, all of Johnstown, and Margaret and the late Mark Blaisdell of Wilmore, Pennsylvania. Eli is following in the footsteps of two of his uncles, Dan Kessler and Paul Kessler, who graduated from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in 1979 and 1975, respectively. Madam Speaker, Eli Blaisdell is a dedicated member of his community. His passion for service and his commitment to his education will serve him well as he heads to Kings Point, New York. Good luck as you enter this next chapter of your life, and thank you for your service to our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mr. Auchincloss from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize our fallen service members as Memorial Day approaches. This weekend, I was proud to join in the dedication of the Fall River Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, which pays homage to the nearly 60,000 Americans who died in Vietnam. They were not always honored as they should have been by contemporaries, but we honor them now. Liberty, justice, and democracy are ultimately protected by those who are willing to lay down their lives to defend these values. This coming Memorial Day, let us enjoy time with our friends and families, a more acute joy than ever after this past year. But let us also center ourselves on the true meaning of the day and reflect on the sacrifice and valor of those no longer with us. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today to remember the victims of the heinous attack on Santa Fe High School on this day back in 2018. 3 years ago, Santa Fe, Texas, a salt-of-the-earth town in my district, was confronted with an incomprehensible evil. Instead of revisiting those horrendous acts of violence, today I rise to honor the lives of those who were tragically cut short. 15-year-old Aaron Kyle McLeod, 15-year-old Angelique Ramirez, 14-year-old Kimberly Vaughn, 63-year-old Cynthia Tisdale, 17-year-old Sabika Sheikh, 17-year-old Jared Black, 16-year-old Shayna Fisher, 64-year-old Glenda Ann Perkins, 15-year-old Christian Riley Garcia, and Chris Stone, who was adventurous, understanding, and easy to talk to. Both Christopher and Christian have received medals of honor for the deed they did. Madam Speaker, it was a solemn day. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank the gentleman. For what purpose does the gentlewoman, Ms. Miller Meeks, seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from Iowa is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to congratulate a young woman from my district for her appointment to fill an important seat in the state of Iowa. On April 16th, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds appointed Abby Crow, a native of Tiffin, Iowa, and a sophomore human physiology major at the University of Iowa, to fill a student seat on the State Board of Regents. The Board of Regents, which governs 5 public educational institutions across Iowa, first established a student regent position in 1973 to give students a say in decision-making. Since then, 5 University of Iowa students have served in this position. On April 28th, Abby was unanimously confirmed to serve on the board, 6 years since the last Hawkeye student filled the seat. The student regent seat is incredibly important, and I have tremendous faith that Abby will be an excellent representative for the university and for her fellow students. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for the gentlewoman, Ms. Miller, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Our nation must be united in our condemnation of the acts of terror and stand in support of the State of Israel, our ally and strategic partner, the beacon of light in the Middle East. Hamas is a terrorist organization with the sole purpose of destroying Israel. Since last Monday, more than 3,000 rockets have been fired from Gaza to Israel. One of my daughter's close friends attended school in Israel. She has been awakened to rockets being fired over her head and has spent days on high alert, ready to run for shelter at any given moment. No country would tolerate thousands of rocket attacks against major cities and population centers. Israel has the obligation and duty to defend its citizens against the violent attacks from Hamas. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and President Trump was the president of peace. His agenda was right, and the United States should stand strong as a friend to Israel. My family and I will continue to pray for the peace and safety of the people of Israel as they combat terrorism. Thank you, and I yield back.
Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on May 18, 2021, at 9:50 a.m. That the Senate pass without amendment H.R. 941. Signed sincerely, Cheryl L. Johnson, Clerk.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time.
Yep, everything dropped. Is there another one there? Okay, I'm sorry.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1157, the Department of State Authorization Act of 2021 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1157, a bill to provide for certain authorities of the Department of State and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 1157 as amended.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 1157, the Department of State Authorization Act of 2021, which I have introduced alongside my good friend and partner, the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mike McCall. H.R. 1157 is a comprehensive, bipartisan measure that builds on the work of several prior Congresses to broadly authorize the management and operation of the Department of State. This sort of bill should be a regular part of our work. However, it has been nearly 2 decades, that's 2 decades, since the State Department authorization bill was enacted into law. And with every passing year, this represents another missed opportunity to ensure the Department of State and our nation's diplomats have the comprehensive support they need to advance America's interests around the world. While we have made progress over the last couple of years, including in 2019 when the House passed an earlier version of this bill, we must finally seize the historic opportunity to do what we have failed to do in the past 10 Congresses. Diplomacy and development are critical tools for advancing the United States' foreign policy and national security objectives, for protecting human rights and the rule of law around the world, for deepening relationships with America's longstanding partners and allies, and for forging new relationships around the world. As COVID-19 pandemic continues to threaten the globe, it has reminded us once again that diplomacy and development are central to solving complex global emergencies, keeping us safe and healthy, and enabling our countries and our communities to thrive. But at the State Department, there's also several vexing management challenges that have gone unaddressed for too long. And the politicization, neglect, and slashing of resources we saw during the previous administration made it harder for our diplomats to do their jobs. We must not only build the State Department back, as President Biden says, we must build it back better. To be clear, diplomacy and development are not just about policy, but about the brave and dedicated public servants who work tirelessly to keep our country safe. Yet, while the Department of State represents the interests of the American people abroad, it has not looked like the America it serves. So among the many important management-related provisions in H.R. 1157, I am particularly proud of those aimed at ensuring a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce. This bill mandates disaggregated and transparent data collection and provides for vital tools to improve the ability of the State Department to recruit, promote, and retain personnel. It pushes for greater transparency and inclusivity in filling senior leadership roles and seeks to address the black box of assignment restrictions accompanying some of the State Department's employees' security clearances that have negatively impacted Asian Americans and other people of color. It also ensures that the department can pay its interns, exposing many more young Americans from across our great country to the important work of the department does around the world, and ensuring a strong and diverse pipeline of talent over the long term. By shoring up other institutional accountability and management safeguards, including to ensure cooperation with the Inspector General's investigations, the bill will also help to prevent the politicization and targeting and impunity that has caused so much harm to the members of the workforce and their morale. We can. No, we must move this bipartisan legislation forward and get Congress back on track to doing right by our great diplomats, our development professionals, and the American people we all serve. So I urge my colleagues to support this measure so that we can move it one step closer to the President's desk. And I now reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to commend my good friend and colleague, Chairman Meeks, for his strong bipartisan approach on this measure to authorize the State Department, as he mentioned. It's been 20 years since Congress has authorized the State Department. This is our obligation under Article 1 of the Constitution. And for 10 Congresses, we have failed in that mission. So I'm very proud today that working with the chairman, we're going to get this thing done and send it over to the Senate. It was 2002 was the last time. And in nearly 20 years since that authority lapsed, we have seen too many taxpayer dollars wasted on inefficient hirings and procurements, and expanding bureaucracy, and an outdated IT system that left us vulnerable to cyber attacks from our adversaries. It is a fundamental duty of the Foreign Affairs Committee to pass an annual authorization bill, just like we passed the National Defense Authorization Bill. This is necessary to fulfill our constitutional oversight responsibilities and our obligation to be good stewards of the people's money. For these reasons, I'm proud of this, again, bipartisan effort our committee, as often we do, has produced. It will address numerous longstanding difficulties. It will fortify the department and our diplomats with the tools needed to fulfill their missions to promote America overseas and enhance our security abroad. Among other important reforms, the bill before us will modernize the State Department workforce, eliminate outdated reports, bolster embassy and information security. It will strengthen the State Department's public diplomacy and anti-corruption efforts, and reassert the Article I prerogatives of the United States Congress. As the United States faces growing challenges around the world, we need our secretary and diplomats to know that Congress supports them. And that's precisely what this bill does. So with that, I want to thank again Chairman Meeks for his great leadership and his team and staff for working with mine. This type of collaboration has been a hallmark of our work on this committee, and I know that it will continue to be so. And again, this bill being 20 years, it's long overdue. This bill deserves our unanimous support. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I would like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Representative Young Kim, an esteemed member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank the gentleman from Texas for yielding. I'm proud to stand in support of H.R. 1157, the Department of State Authorization Act of 2021, and I want to thank Chair Mix and Ranking Member McCall for their efforts to reform the State Department, including offering improved job and skills training opportunities for foreign service officers. And I'm honored to have 2 amendments included in this bill, the first of which I introduced separately as H.R. 1244. Today, many foreign service officers and State Department staff spend an outsized amount of their time complying with duplicative and outdated reporting requirements mandated by Congress. H.R. 1244 repeals those requirements to streamline the flow of information from State Department to Congress and allow our foreign service officers to spend more time working towards accomplishing America's foreign affairs objectives. So I want to thank Mr. Connolly for also working with me on this initiative, and I urge all of my colleagues to support H.R. 1157. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas reserved. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman is reserved. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm prepared to close and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think this is a momentous day for the Congress, and I want to thank my friend and colleague, Chairman Meeks, for his great leadership in bringing this long overdue authorization bill to the floor. I also want to thank former Chairman Elliot Engel, who I worked with very closely to get an authorization bill passed out of the House just to see it fail in the Senate. I hope the Senate will not allow that to happen again. This is really desperately needed. It is a momentous day for the House. It's critical. It's bipartisan. It reclaims our constitutional prerogatives of the Congress and the full oversight role of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. So with that, I think it deserves our unanimous support, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Yes, I yield much time as I may consume for closing purposes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Let me thank Ranking Member McCall for his partnership in bringing this bipartisan bill to the floor. And I joined him in also recognizing the fact that former Chair Elliot Engel and what you attempted to do in the previous Congress to make this happen. And it would not have happened had not we had the work and the continuous cooperation of both of our staffs in trying to, in putting this bill together. So I want to be thankful to them. You know, when we talk about H.R. 1157, the Department of State Authorization Act of 2021, what it's going to do, it's going to make the State Department better prepared to conduct diplomacy and meet the challenges that we have of the 21st century. Congress must make authorizing the Department of State a regular part of its legislative efforts. As the ranking member said, just as much as we pass bills through for defense, NDAA, we must be sure that we're passing the state authorization bill. So, and what happens and will happen by passing this bill, we can ensure that state has the tools that it needs so that it can be more effective, more resilient, and more reflective of the America it represents abroad. So this should be, and I hope all of my colleagues join me and Ranking Member McCall in supporting this bill in a unanimous way, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 1157, as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being...
Madam Speaker?
Two-thirds affirmative. The rule... the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I request the yeas and nays.